These are perilous times, and the position of Secretary of Defense demands a leader of unparalleled experience, wisdom, and above all else, character. The Secretary is expected to be a fair, nonpartisan, and responsible leader, as well as a trustworthy advocate for the men and women that he leads. Mr. Hegseth, I do not believe that you are qualified to meet the overwhelming demands of this job. We must acknowledge the concerning public reports against you. A variety of sources, including your own writings, implicate you with disregarding the laws of war, financial mismanagement, racist and sexist remarks about men and women in uniform, alcohol abuse, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and other troubling issues. I have reviewed many of these allegations and find them extremely alarming. Indeed, the totality of your own writings and alleged conduct would disqualify any service member from holding any leadership position in the military, much less being confirmed as the Secretary of Defense. Nonetheless, I understand that you reject many of these reports as they involve whistleblowers, non-disclosure agreements, and anonymous, although numerous, sources, including those who have faced political intimidation for sharing their experiences. I hope you will address each of these allegations thoroughly and truthfully during your testimony. Just as importantly, I hope you will pledge to prevent any repercussions for whistleblowers, both civilian and military, if confirmed.
Thank you to my incredible wife, Jennifer, who has changed my life and been with me throughout this entire process. I love you, sweetheart, and I thank God for you. And as Jenny and I pray together every morning, all glory, regardless of the outcome, belongs to our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. His grace and mercy abounds each day. May his will be done. Thank you to my father, Brian, and mother, Penny, as well as our entire family, including our 7 wonderful kids, Gunnar, Jackson, Peter Boone, Kensington, Luke, Rex, sorry, it's a lot of them, and Gwendolyn. Their future safety and security is in all of our hands. And to all the troops and veterans watching and here in the room, Navy SEALs, Green Berets, soldiers, pilots, sailors, Marines, Gold Stars, and more, too many friends to name. Officers, enlisted, black and white, young and old, men and women, all Americans, all warriors. This hearing is for you. Thank you for figuratively and literally having my back.
You are a misogynist. Not only that, you are a Christian Zionist. And you support the war in Gaza by the Zionists.
I want to thank the authorities for their swift reaction to that outburst and state that similar interruptions will be treated in like manner. Mr. Hegseth, you may continue.
Well, as I'll say again, thank you for figuratively and literally having my back. I pledge to do the same for all of you. It's an honor to come before this committee today as President Donald Trump's nominee for the office of Secretary of Defense. 2 months ago, 77 million Americans gave President Trump a powerful mandate for change, to put America first, at home and abroad. I want to thank President Trump for his faith in me and his selfless leadership for our republic. The troops have no better commander-in-chief than Donald Trump. As I've said to many of you in private meetings, when President Trump chose me for this position, the primary charge he gave me was to bring the warrior culture back to the Department of Defense. He, like me, wants a Pentagon laser-focused on lethality, meritocracy, warfighting, accountability, and readiness.
You may continue, sir.
Returning the Pentagon back to warfighting, that's it. That's my job.
Mr. Hegseth, suspend your remarks. Let me just say this. The Capitol Police are going to remove immediately individuals that are disrupting the hearing. I see a pattern attempted to be inflicted on the committee, and we're simply not going to tolerate that. You may proceed.
To bring back warfighting, if confirmed, I'm going to work with President Trump and this committee to, one, restore the warrior ethos to the Pentagon and throughout our fighting force. In doing so, we will reestablish trust in our military, addressing the recruiting crisis, the retention crisis, and readiness crisis in our ranks.
Members of the security force will remove members. Mr. Hegseth, you may.
The strength of our military is our unity and our shared purpose, not our differences. Number two, we're going to rebuild our military, always matching threats to capabilities. This includes reviving our defense industrial base, reforming the acquisitions process. As you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, no more valley of death for new defense companies, modernizing our nuclear triad, ensuring the Pentagon can pass an audit, and rapidly fielding emerging technologies. And number three, we're going to reestablish deterrence.
You've been instrumental in securing pardons for several convicted war criminals. In at least two of these cases, the military personnel who served in combat with these convicted service members were not supportive of the pardons. They did their duty as soldiers to report war crimes. Your definition of lethality seems to embrace those people who do commit war crimes, rather than those who stand up and say, this is not right. So what's the response to your service members who personally witnessed these and courageously reported them to their superiors?
Senator, as someone who's led men in combat directly and had to make very difficult decisions, I've thought very deeply about the balance between legality and lethality, ensuring that the men and women on the front lines have the opportunity to destroy with and close the enemy, and that lawyers aren't the ones getting in the way. I'm not talking about disavowing the laws of war or the Geneva Conventions or the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Sir, I'm talking about restrictive rules of engagement that these men and women behind me understand they've lived with on the battlefield, which has made it more difficult to defeat our enemies. In many of the cases you're talking about in particular, sir, there was evidence withheld, there was prosecutorial misconduct, and as someone who looks case by case and defaults to the warfighter, to the men and women with dust on their boots, not the second guessers in air-conditioned offices in Washington, D.C.
Excuse me.
I look case by case and was proud to work with President Trump to understand those cases and ensure that our warriors are always looked out for.
Those cases were adjudicated by who? People in Washington or fellow non-commissioned officers who had also served, sacrificed, and believed in the ethic of the military? Who were the court-martial?
Senator, in multiple cases, they were actually acquitted, but charges lingered.
Yes,
regardless of where those convening authorities were, yes, sir.
Some were, but others were convicted, and you asked for pardon. That's the only reason you asked for pardon, because they were convicted. But the other factor, too, is you've already disparaged in writing the Geneva Convention, the rules of law, all of these things. How will you be able to effectively lead a military in which one of the principal elements is discipline, respect for lawful authority? You have made statements to your platoon after being briefed by a JAG officer. Well, by the way, would you explain what a JAG-off is?
I don't think I need to, sir.
Why not?
Because the men and women watching understand.
Well, perhaps some of my colleagues don't understand.
It would be a JAG officer who puts his or her own priorities in front of the warfighters. Their promotions, their medals, in front of having the backs of those who are making the tough calls on the front lines.
Thank you, Senator Reed.
Interesting.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Sir, do you believe and agree with President Trump's 2018 nuclear posture review that preventing adversary nuclear attacks is, quote, the highest priority of the United States?
Senator, yes, I do.
If confirmed, will you commit to supporting all three legs of the nuclear triad and to using every tool available to deliver these systems on schedule?
Senator, yes, I do, because ultimately our deterrence, our survival is reliant upon the capability, the perception, and the reality of the capability of our nuclear triad. We have to invest in its modernization for the defense of our nation.
While former secretaries of defense have stated that nuclear deterrence is the highest priority, we haven't really seen that translated into budget requests or using the tools like the Defense Production Act. You've spoken about increasing lethality. You've spoken about getting programs done faster. How would you actually implement a culture change so that we can see these delivery schedules move forward, be rewarded? I can tell you in most every briefing we have, the schedules we're on are too late. So what would you do?
Well, ultimately focused first on the things that are most important, as we have discussed, Senator, the nuclear triad, understanding whether it's the B-21 or the Minuteman to the Sentinel, all aspects of the Columbia-class submarines, ballistic missiles. What are the priorities that need to be focused on and ensure that in those particular cases, you mentioned it, Senator, the Defense Production Act, emergency powers. If we're at a place where our nuclear capabilities are perceived to not be what they are, that is an emergency. And we have an ally in our incoming commander-in-chief, in President Donald Trump, who has spoken about these things, understands the power and strength of nuclear deterrence, will not allow them to be
It's the existential
deprioritized.
threat. It's the existential threat to this nation. How do you change the culture? It's not just the Production Act that's going to be able to do it. How are you going to move forward faster?
Competition, Senator, is important, critically important. The Death Valley that was talked about, leveraging the innovation of Silicon Valley, which for the first time in generations has shown a willingness, desire, and capability to bring its best technologies to bear at the Pentagon, a Pentagon that has become too insular, tries to block new technologies from coming in. So we have to embrace that, there's some great Office of Strategic Capital, DIU initiatives that provide loans to companies to participate, because you have to invest in the defense industrial base for the longer term projects. We have the capability, the missiles and the munitions, but also to rapidly field emerging technologies that we need on the battlefield right now. So as we learn things, say in the war in Ukraine, those technologies, as we look at threats we're gonna face, find ways to rapidly field those using off-the-shelf technologies or standard designs, modular designs. Another easy one, Senator, that became evident in the process is digital designs. The Pentagon often builds entire systems without first using a digital design.
Okay.
Which means you build prototypes and then scrap them and start over again. No private sector business could survive doing business that way. So there's a lot of innovation, and I'm going to hire a lot of smart people already have to help with that.
I was pleased when I was contacted on your behalf about meeting before this hearing. I've been on this committee since 2011, and during that time, I voted to confirm 6 nominees to be Secretary of Defense from 3 administrations, 2 Democratic and 1 Republican, the first Trump administration. Every one of those nominees met with me and my Democratic colleagues on this committee before the hearing. So, as you can imagine, I was disappointed when no one ever followed up. When we followed up with your office, you were not able to meet. Do you understand that if you're confirmed to be Secretary of Defense, that you will have a responsibility to meet with all members of this committee, not just Republicans?
Senator, I very much appreciate and understand the traditionally bipartisan nature of this committee. Their national defense is not partisan. It should not be about Republicans or Democrats. And so I look forward to working together with you and your colleagues on priorities facing this nation. Yes?
I think we would expect that. And one reason that I wanted to meet with you was because I thought it would be really helpful to better understand your views on women in the military. because you've made a number of surprising statements about women serving in the military. As recently as November the 7th of 2024 on the Sean Ryan Show, you said, and I quote, "I'm straight up saying that we should not have women in combat roles. It hasn't made us more effective." The quote went on a little longer, but that was the gist of it. That was before you were nominated to be Secretary of Defense. Mr. Hegseth, do you know what percentage of our military is comprised of women?
I believe it's 18 to 20%, Senator.
It's almost 18%, and in fact, DOD's 2023 demographic report indicated that there are more women serving now, and there are fewer separations. So they make up a critical part of our military, wouldn't you agree?
Yes, ma'am. Women in our military, as I have said publicly, have and continue to make amazing contributions across all aspects of our battlefield.
Well, you also write in your book, The War on Warriors, with the chapter, The Deadly Obsession with Women Warriors, that, quote, "Not only are women comparatively less effective than men in combat roles, but they are more likely to be objectified by the enemy and their own nation in the moral realms of war." Mr. Hegseth, should we take it to believe that you believe that the two women on this committee who have served honorably and with distinction made our military less effective and less capable?
I'm incredibly grateful for the two women who've served our military in uniform and including in the Central Intelligence Agency, contributions on the battlefield, indispensable contributions. Senator, I would like to clarify, when I'm talking about that issue, it's not about the capabilities of men and women, it's about standards. And this committee has talked a lot about standards. Standards that we, unfortunately, over time, have seen eroded in certain duty positions, certain schools, certain places, which affects readiness, which is what I care about the most, readiness on the battlefield.
I appreciate that.
And so my comments point time and time again to standards.
Your statements publicly have not been to that effect. After your nomination, you did state to a group of reporters that you, quote, "support all women serving in our military today who do a fantastic job across the globe, including combat." So what I'm confused about, Mr. Hegseth, is which is it? Why should women in our military, if you were the Secretary of Defense, believe that they would have a fair shot and an equal opportunity to rise through the ranks? If on the one hand, you say that women are not competent, they make our military less effective, and on the other hand, you say, oh no, now that I've been nominated to be the Secretary of Defense, I've changed my view on women in the military. What do you have to say to the almost 400,000 women who are serving today about your position on whether they should be capable to rise through the highest ranks of our military?
Senator, I would say I would be honored to have the opportunity to serve alongside you, shoulder to shoulder, men and women, black, white, all backgrounds, with a shared purpose. Our differences are not what define us. Our unity and our shared purpose is what define us, and you will be treated fairly and with dignity, honor, and respect, just like every man and woman in uniform, just like the men and women that I've worked with in my veterans organizations, to include when I was a headquarters and headquarters company commander in the Minnesota National Guard.
Well, I appreciate your 11th hour
well.
conversion, but Mr. Chairman, for the record, I would like to submit Chapter 5, The Deadly Obsession with Women Warriors, for the record.
We've got a big audience here. Many of them seem to be patriotic supporters of you, Mr. Hegseth. Some of them seem to be liberal critics of you. I would note that it's only the liberal critics that have disrupted this hearing. As was my custom during the Biden administration, I want to give you a chance to respond to what they said about you. I think the first one accused you of being a Christian Zionist. I'm not really sure why that is a bad thing. I'm a Christian. I'm a Zionist. Zionism is that the Jewish people deserve a homeland in the ancient Holy Land where they've lived since the dawn of history. Do you consider yourself a Christian Zionist?
Senator, I'm a Christian, and I robustly support the state of Israel and its existential defense, and the way America comes alongside them is a great ally.
Thank you. Because another protester, and I think this one was a member of Code Pink, which, by the way, is a Chinese Communist front group these days, said that you support Israel's war in Gaza. I support Israel's existential war in Gaza. I assume, like me and President Trump, you support that war as well, don't you?
Senator, I do. I support Israel destroying and killing every last member of Hamas.
And the third protester said something about 20 years of genocide. I assume that's our wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. Do you think our troops are committing genocide in Iraq and Afghanistan?
Senator, I do not. I think our troops, as you know, as so many in this committee know, did the best they could with what they had. We're not the outcomes, and tragically, the outcome we saw in Afghanistan under the Biden administration put a stain on.
So please explain specifically, because you will be in charge of 3 million personnel. It is a big job. And when you make these public statements, and I get you were not Secretary of Defense then, I get you were on TV, I get you were helping veterans, I get it was a different job. But most recently, you said this in November of 2024, knowing full well you might have been named as Secretary of Defense. So please explain these types of statements, because they're brutal and they're mean and they disrespect men and women who are willing to die for this country.
Well, Senator, I appreciate your comments, and I would point out I have never disparaged women serving in the military. I respect every single female service member that has put on the uniform, past and present. My critiques, Senator, recently and in the past, and from personal experience, have been instances where I've seen standards lowered, and you mentioned 11 Alpha, 11 Bravo, MOS, places in units, and the book that has been referenced multiple times here, The War on Warriors. I spent months talking to active duty service members, men and women, low ranks, high ranks, combat arms and not combat arms. And what each and every one of them told me, and which personal instances have shown me, is that in ways direct, indirect, overt, and subtle, standards have been changed inside infantry training units, ranger school, infantry battalions, to ensure that
Give me one example. Please give me an example. I get you're making these generalized statements.
Commanders meet quotas to have a certain number of female infantry officers or infantry enlisted, and that disparages those women
Commanders
who are
do
incredibly
not have to
capable
meet
of meeting
quotas
that
for the
standard.
infantry. Commanders do not have to have a quota for women in the infantry. That does not exist. It does not exist. And your statements are creating the impression that these exist, because they do not. There are not quotas. We want the most lethal force. But I'm telling you, having been here for 15 years, listening to testimony about men and women in combat and the type of operations that were successful in Afghanistan and in Iraq, women were essential for many of those units. When Ranger units went in to find where the terrorists hiding in Afghanistan or in Iraq, if they had a woman in the unit, they could go in, talk to the women in a village, say, where are the terrorists hiding? Where are the weapons hiding? And get crucial information to make sure that we can win that battle. So you cannot denigrate women in general, and your statements do that. We don't want women in the military, especially in combat. What a terrible statement. So please, do not deny that you've made those statements. You have. We take the responsibility of standards very seriously, and we will work with you. I'm equally distressed you would not meet with me before this hearing. We could have covered all of this before you came here, so I could get to the 15 other questions that I want to get to.
I would also acknowledge you were mentioning female engagement teams, which have shown a great deal of success on the battlefield. It would be and universally acknowledged as such. I've been in Iraqi homes where the language and gender barrier was real, and the ability to have someone there to help in that process would be a massive accelerant in mission success. So I recognize that reality. I also recognize that female engagement teams assigned to a SEAL team or a Green Beret team meet different standards also, which is okay because of the duty positions involved in that job. As far as politics, Senator, it has been the joy of my life to lead men and women in military outfits. When you're in combat or in training, there's a lot of conversations that happen. And you start to realize that a lot of people you're serving with share your political ideals or they don't. You find out there's Republicans, there's Democrats, there's libertarians, there's independents, there's vegetarians, everything in between. None of that matters. It never mattered in how I led men and women, how I interacted with them, what missions we undertook. Politics has nothing to do with the battlefield, which is why President Trump has asked me to say, let's make sure all of that comes out. This is about warfighting capability. setting standards high, and making sure we give our boys, our men and women, everything they need to be successful on the battlefield. So politics can play no part in that, and I look forward to infusing that, as we always have inside our units.
What steps would you take to prepare the Department of Defense to simultaneously execute and sustain operations across multiple regions while maintaining readiness and deterrence globally? And I just have to make note, and I want to make it clear, we have language in this year's fiscal year 2025 National Defense Authorization Act calling for a review of the department's operational plans. And I just want to make sure that you're aware of that, and that we will have, if we have a fight with one, the chances are very good that we're going to have two battles or two different battlegrounds at the same time.
Senator, which is why I believe our country's incredibly fortunate to have a new commander-in-chief in Donald Trump, who through the strategic approach he has taken with allies and against foes has prevented wars and is determined to do the same. That's our chief job, is deter and prevent wars. My job, should I be confirmed at the Secretary of Defense, is to ensure we have the right prioritization of assets and strategy, and then the tools in the toolbox necessary, the pointiest possible spear for President Trump to wield if necessary as the last resort. So President Trump at the helm, I think, will go a long way in making sure our enemies know there's a new sheriff in town.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
But like me, a lot of Iowans are really, really concerned and upset about the wasteful Washington spending and, of course, in our Pentagon. It's an issue that I have been combating for years. So there's significant room for greater efficiency and cost cutting within the department. And the DOD is the only federal agency that has never passed an audit. As the Senate DOJ caucus chair and founder, that's unacceptable to me, and it should be unacceptable to you as well. So I appreciate that you mentioned that in your opening statement. What are those steps that you will take to ensuring the Pentagon has a clean audit by the year 2028?
Senator, I appreciate your work on this topic, which you've been involved in for a long time. You mentioned Concerned Veterans for America. I just want to clarify, we have very generous donors who set a very clear budget that we stuck to every single year. So the latitude there was restricted, and we worked very hard and diligently inside it. You've also been a leader on the Pentagon audit for a very long time. I think when we met, Senator, I said 2014 was the first year. Mm-hmm. We discovered a 2013 op-ed I wrote about the need for a Pentagon audit, because an audit is an issue of national security and frankly, respect to American taxpayers who give $850 billion over to the Defense Department and expect that we know where that money goes. And if that money is going somewhere that doesn't add to tooth and instead goes to fat or tail, we need to know that. Or if it's wasted, we need to know that. So I think previous secretaries of defense, with all due respect, haven't necessarily emphasized the strategic prerogative of an audit. And myself, my deputy SecDef, and others already know that a Pentagon audit will be the comptroller, others central to ensuring we find those dollars that can be used elsewhere legally under the law inside the Pentagon. So you have my word, it will be a priority.
Okay, thank you.
You recently promised some of my Republican colleagues that you stopped drinking and won't drink if confirmed, correct?
Absolutely.
Will you resign as Secretary of Defense if you drink on the job, which is a 24/7 position?
I've made this commitment on behalf of
Will
the
you
men and women I'm
resign
serving.
as Secretary of Defense
I've
if
made
you
this
drink
commitment on
on the
behalf
job?
of the men and women I'm serving.
I'm not
because it's the
hearing-
most important deployment
I'm not
of my
hearing an
life.
answer to my question, so I'm going to move on. While you have made that commitment, you will not commit to resigning if you drink on the job. As Secretary of Defense, you will swear an oath to the Constitution and not an oath to any man, woman, or president, correct?
Senator, on multiple occasions, including as a young second lieutenant, I have sworn an oath to the
Answer is
Constitution,
yes.
and I'm proud to do so. Yes, ma'am.
In June of 2020, then President Trump directed former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper to shoot protesters in the legs in downtown D.C., an order Secretary Esper refused to comply with. Would you carry out such an order from President Trump?
Senator, I was in the Washington, D.C. National Guard unit that was in Lafayette Square during those
Would you
events,
carry
holding
out
a
an
riot
order to
shield on
shoot
behalf of my
protesters
country.
in the legs?
I saw 50
as
Secret
directed
Service agents
to
get injured by
Secretary Esper?
rioters trying to jump over the fence, set
Again,
the church on fire, and destroy
You know
a
what, that
statue.
sounds to me that you will
Chaos.
comply with such an order. You will shoot protesters in the leg. Moving on. President-elect has attacked our allies in recent weeks, refusing to rule out using military force to take over Greenland and the Panama Canal, and threatening to make Canada the 51st state. Would you carry out an order from President Trump to seize Greenland, a territory of our NATO ally Denmark, by force, or would you comply with an order to take over the Panama Canal?
Senator, I will emphasize that President Trump received 77 million votes to be the lawful
We're
commander-in-chief
not
of
talking
this
about
country.
the election. My question is, would you use our military to take over Greenland or an ally of Denmark?
Senator, one of the things that President Trump is so good at is never strategically tipping his hand. And so I would never in this public forum give one way or another direct what orders the president would give me in any context.
That sounds to me that you would contemplate carrying out such an order to basically invade Greenland and take over the Panama Canal. Current DoD policy allows service members and eligible dependents to be reimbursed for travel associated with non-covered reproductive health care, including abortions. Will you maintain this common sense policy?
Senator, I've always been personally pro-life. I know President Trump has as well, and we will review all policies, but our standard is whatever the president wants on this particular issue with my advice, I will take a look at.
If the president tells you that this common sense policy will not be maintained, you will not enable our service members to seek reproductive care. So it sounds
I don't
like to
believe the
me.
federal government should be
I'm not hearing
funding
answers to my questions,
travel for
Mr.
abortion.
Chairman. I just want to note that the other area that of serious concern to me is President Trump saying that he wants to use the military to help with mass deportations, which will cost billions of dollars. And what that will do to readiness is very, very concerning. Mr. Hegseth, I have noticed a disturbing pattern. You previously have made a series of inflammatory statements about women in combat, LGBTQ service members, Muslim Americans, and Democrats. Since your nominations, however, you have walked those back on TV in interviews and most recently in your opening statements. You are no longer on Fox and Friends, Mr. Hegseth. If confirmed, your words, actions, and decisions will have real impacts on national security and our service members' lives. There are close to 3 million personnel in the Department of Defense, $900 billion budget. I hardly think you are prepared to do the job. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. That wasn't a question, Mr. Hegseth.
I've seen over the past 4 years as a senator on this committee and as a Marine Corps Reserve officer was on day one, the Biden administration played up a false and insulting narrative that our military was chock full of racist and violent extremists. This reached a pinnacle in this committee when Biden's Undersecretary of Policy, Colin Kahl, the #3 guy at the Pentagon, testified that one of his top goals would be to, quote, ending violent extremism and systemic racism within the ranks of the military. He had no data on this. The media loved it, fanned the flames, wrote baloney stories on this false narrative. Disappointingly, some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle here reinforce this ridiculous narrative, one even suggesting that almost 10% of our uniformed military was extremists, 200,000 members, ridiculous, by the way, from this committee on the other side of the aisle. Mr. Hegseth, unlike Undersecretary Kahl, you have a lot of experience with our military. Do you believe the military is a systemically racist organization? And if confirmed, will you commit to defend, not denigrate our troops?
Senator, I was also offended by those comments because anyone who's been on active duty in the National Guard, man, woman in units, understand that is fundamentally false.
By the way, there's 3 studies, to his credit, Secretary Austin put out one of them, that said exactly what you just said. Fundamentally false.
Senator, they knew it. Anyone who'd been in a unit knew it. One could argue that if not the least, one of the least racist institutions in our country is the United States military.
That's
Being
right.
a racist in our military has not been tolerated for a very long time.
One of the
Never in my
greatest civil
formations,
rights
never in other
organizations in
formations.
America. Would you agree the U.S. military is one of the most forward-leaning, probably one of the greatest civil rights organizations in American history?
No doubt.
Now, if it had been a sexual assault, that would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, wouldn't it?
It was a false claim then and a false claim now.
If it had been a sexual assault, that would be disqualifying to be Secretary of Defense, wouldn't it?
That was a false claim.
So
Just
you
talking
can't,
about a hypothetical.
so you can't tell me whether someone who has committed a sexual assault is disqualified from being Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I know in my instance, and I'm talking about my instance only, it was a false claim.
But you acknowledge
And
you
it was
cheat, but
fully
you acknowledge
investigated.
that you cheated on your wife and that you cheated on the woman by whom you had just fathered a child. You have admitted that.
I will allow your words to speak for themselves.
You're not retracting that today. That's good. I assume that in each of your weddings, you've pledged to be faithful to your wife. You've taken an oath to do that, haven't you?
Senator, as I've acknowledged to everyone in this committee, not a perfect person, not claiming to
But
be.
no, I just asked a simple question. You've taken an oath, like you would take an oath to be Secretary of Defense in all of your weddings to be faithful to your wife. Is that correct?
I have failed in things in my life, and thankfully I'm redeemed by my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ.
In finalizing divorces from your first and second wives, were there non-disclosure agreements in connection with those divorces?
Senator, not that I'm aware of.
If there were, would you agree to release those first and second wives from any confidentiality agreement?
Senator, it's not something I'm aware of.
But if there were, you would agree to release them from a confidentiality agreement?
Senator, that's not my responsibility.
Did you ever engage in any acts of physical violence against any of your wives?
Senator, absolutely not.
But you would agree with me that if someone had committed physical violence against a spouse, that would be disqualifying to serve as Secretary of Defense, correct?
Senator, absolutely not have I ever done that.
You would agree that that would be a disqualifying offense, would you not?
Senator, you're talking about a hypothetical.
I don't think it's a hypothetical. Violence against spouses occurs every day. And if you as a leader are not capable of saying that physical violence against a spouse should be a disqualifying fact for being secretary of the most powerful nation in the world, you're demonstrating an astonishing lack of judgment. The incident in Monterey led to a criminal charge, a criminal investigation, a private settlement, and a cash payment to the woman who filed the complaint. And there was also a non-disclosure agreement, correct?
It was a confidential settlement agreement off of a nuisance lawsuit.
Right. During an interview, you claimed that you settled the matter because you were worried that if it became public, it might hurt your career. Do you maintain that you were blackmailed?
Senator, I maintain that false claims were made against me. And ultimately,
Your attorney
those
used
false
the phrase,
claims, I have the opportunity to attest my innocence in those false claims.
But you didn't reveal any of this to President Trump or the transition team as they were considering you to be nominated for Secretary of Defense. You didn't reveal the action. You didn't reveal the criminal complaint. You didn't reveal the criminal investigation. You didn't reveal the settlement. You didn't reveal the cash payment. Why didn't you inform the commander-in-chief and the transition team of this very relevant event?
Senator, I've appreciated every part of the process with the transition team. They have been open and honest with me. We've had great conversations between the two of us, and I appreciate the opportunity that President-elect Trump has given me.
You chose not to reveal this, right? Because you knew it would hurt your chances. So you chose not to reveal this really important thing to the commander-in-chief and the transition team because you were worried about your chances rather than trying to be candid with the future president of the United States. Are there any other important facts that you chose not to reveal to the president-elect and his team as they were considering you to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, I sit here before you an open book, as everyone who's watched this process.
With multiple non-disclosure and confidentiality agreements tying the hands of many people who would like to comment to us. Much has been made of your workplace behavior as a leader of nonprofit veterans organizations and as a Fox News contributor. Were you fired from either of the leadership positions with the nonprofits?
I was the leader. I was the CEO of Concerned
I know
Veterans
which
for
ones, but
America and the
those
executive
two,
director
were
of
you
Vets for
fired?
Freedom.
Were you fired from either
And I
of
was
them?
never fired from a
Do you have
veterans organization.
Do you have non-disclosure agreements with either of those organizations?
Not that I'm aware of, Senator.
Many of your work colleagues have said that you show up for work under the influence of alcohol or drunk. I know you've denied that, but you would agree with me, right, that if that was the case, that would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense.
Senator, those are all anonymous false claims, and the totality
They're not anonymous.
The letters
We've
on the
seen-
record here.
They're not anonymous.
On the record, people
We've
who've
seen
worked with
records
me
with
at
names
Vets for
attached to
Freedom,
them.
Concerned Vets for America, and Fox News
One of
attributing
your-
to me
one of your
being
colleagues
working
said-
hard every day on behalf of
One of
my
your
mission.
colleagues said that you got drunk at an event at a bar and chanted, "Kill all Muslims." Another colleague, not anonymous, we have this, said that you took co-workers to a strip club. You were drunk, you tried to dance with strippers, you had to be held off the stage, and one of your employees in that event filed a sexual harassment charge as a result of it. Now, I know you denied these things, but isn't that the kind of behavior that, if true, would be disqualifying for somebody to be Secretary of Defense?
Senator, anonymous false charges.
They're not anonymous. And I'll just conclude and say this to the chairman. You claim that this was all anonymous. We have seen records with names attached to all of these, including the name of your own mother. So don't make this into some anonymous press thing. We have seen multiple names of colleagues consistently throughout your career that have talked about your abusive actions,
Chairman, I think
attitudes,
he's
words,
over
and
his time.
statements
He's way
to women.
over his time.
I now yield.
I also want to get back to, you mentioned, and it got rather dismissed quickly, pivoted, as a lot of things do. You'd mentioned that you were not able to serve with your National Guard unit in the protection of the inauguration of Joe Biden because of a tattoo, a Christian tattoo. Can you elaborate just a little bit on what is this very offensive, extremist, racist tattoo that you have?
It's a tattoo I have right here, Senator. It's called the Jerusalem Cross. It's a historic Christian symbol. In fact, interestingly, recently I attended briefly the memorial ceremony of former President Jimmy Carter on the floor of our National Cathedral. On the front page of his program was the very same Jerusalem Cross. It is a Christian religious symbol. And when the events happened before preceding the Biden inauguration, I was a part of the mobilization to defend that inauguration as someone who'd been a proud supporter of Donald Trump, but also a member of the military, had orders to come to Washington, D.C. to guard that inauguration. And at the last minute, those orders were revoked. I'd never had orders revoked before. I'd been on orders to a lot of places to do a lot of difficult and dangerous things. They were revoked, and I was not told why. Later, when I wrote my book, I was able to get information. It was because I had been identified. Someone who'd served in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Guantanamo Bay, holding a riot shield outside the White House. I'd been identified as an extremist, as someone unworthy of guarding the inauguration of an incoming American president. And if that's happening to me, Senator, how many other men and women, how many other patriots, how many other people of conscience? We haven't even talked about COVID and the tens of thousands of service members who were kicked out because of an experimental vaccine. In President Trump's Defense Department, they will be apologized to, they will be reinstituted with pay and rank. Things like focusing on extremism, Senator, have created a climate inside our ranks that feel political when it hasn't ever been political. Those are the types of things that are going to change. And Senator Sullivan, you mentioned that study. After a whole study was held, extremism working group study, 100 extremists were identified in the ranks of 3 million. And most of those were gang-related. So it was a made-up boogeyman to begin with.
You, Mr. Hegseth, are not the extremist. The people who would deny you your expression of faith are the extremists. They're the racists. They're the bigots. You're the one that is protecting their right to be one. Thank you for that.
You know, I made repeated requests to meet with you prior to this meeting. I know many of my other colleagues also wanted to meet with you. I did that with the other nominees that I was happy to vote for. I thought they were highly qualified individuals and true professionals. And yet I could never get a meeting with you. Was there a reason you were afraid to have one-on-one meetings with some of my colleagues before the hearing?
Senator, I know there was a great deal of outreach to multiple offices. Schedules get full. There's a lot going on.
I was ready.
And I welcome the opportunity, pending
ready.
my schedule, to have an opportunity to sit down.
I was ready. It would have been so much better to have that opportunity to talk beforehand. I think that's a big mistake, and it doesn't set us on a good course when you refuse to meet with people and have a professional conversation about the huge challenges that we face at the Department of Defense. My colleagues, the folks who introduced you and others, the chairman has mentioned about the management of the DOD is a concern, cost overruns, delays on weapon systems. We need strong management at the Department of Defense, first and foremost. We've got to have someone who's going to grab the reins and give the taxpayers value for having the most lethal fighting force in the world that defends freedoms, but we've got to do it in an efficient way. I've heard about the jobs you've had in the past. Let's just talk about qualifications. I know you had 2 previous positions. How many people reported to you in those positions?
Senator, at Vets for Freedom, we were a small upstart. Our focus was
just the number,
working
please.
on Capitol Hill, going back to the battlefield
Just
to
the
support
number.
warfighters.
Just the number, please.
We probably had 8 to 10 full-time staff and lots of volunteers.
So you had 8. Has there been any other, we've heard about the 2, and certainly there's been a lot of talk about the mismanagement, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just curious, I won't go into that, just curious. So you had 8 there. What's the largest number of people you've ever supervised or had in an organization in your career?
Not 3 million, Senator.
No, I don't expect that. Very few people have ever had that experience, but how many? It's a straight up question.
I think we had over 100 full-time staff at Concerned Vets for America, roughly, with thousands of volunteers.
So 100 people.
I was also a headquarters company commander, which would have been
that's fine.
a couple of hundred. Nothing remotely near the size of the Defense Department,
Right.
I would acknowledge that.
Actually,
Senator.
not remotely near even a medium-sized company in America, let alone a big company in America, especially a major corporation. And we're hiring you to be the CEO of one of the most complex, largest organizations in the world. We're the board of directors here. I don't know of any corporate board of directors that would hire a CEO for a major company if they came and said, you know, I supervised 100 people before. They'd ask you, well, what kind of experiences you had? We need innovation. Can you give me an experience or your actual experience of driving innovation in an organization? Give me an example of where you have done that.
Oh my goodness, Senator, absolutely. At Concerned Veterans for America, we created the Fixing Veterans Healthcare Task Force, a bipartisan task force that never been done before, to create policy, to drive policy change on Capitol Hill that organizations fought ferociously against. We got the VA Accountability Act passed and the Mission Act passed in a way that a nonprofit of our size, veterans organization, has never done. And that's testified in all the letters that we put forward to the committee, which are on the record.
I have limited time. Thank you for that. Give me an example of where you've driven down cost. I've heard the examples that Senator Blumenthal gave. The cost was a real problem for you in your 50-person organization that you actually raised a lot less than what you actually spent. Did you drive costs down? If in a 50-person organization, let me tell you, we've got to drive costs down dramatically in an organization of 3 million people and hundreds of billions of dollars. You don't have that experience that you can talk about. To me, this is, or acquisition reform. Acquisition reform, you bring that up. Have you had experience in acquisition reform?
I've written about and studied on acquisition reform.
Have you
for quite
actually
some
done
time.
it?
Because what we need in the hands of our warfighters better change because we're not doing it well right now.
It better, and we need people who have experience actually doing that. You know, you talk about standards. Again, I'm going to go back to CEO of the most complex organization in the world. I don't think there's a board of directors in America that would hire you as a CEO with the kind of experience you have on your resume. You talk about standards. You talk about raising or low, that we have a problem of standards in the DOD, and we have to raise standards for the men and women who serve. Do you think that the way to raise the minimum standards of the people who serve us is to lower the standards for the Secretary of Defense, that we have someone who has never managed an organization more than 100 people is going to come in and manage this incredibly important organization and do it with a professionalism and has no experience that they can tell us that they have actually done that? I have real problems with that. This is not about other issues that are brought up. They're all very important. I'm just about trying to get things done, managing efficiently, and having the best people who have demonstrated that in a large organization. And I'm sorry, but I don't see that in your background. There are a lot of other things you can do very well. You're a capable person, but you have not convinced me that you're able to take on this tremendous responsibility with a complex organization and having little or no significant management experience.
Senator, I'm grateful to be hired by one of the most successful CEOs in American history, should I be confirmed.
Mr. Hegseth, it seems to me that you've supervised far more people than the average United States senator supervises typically.
We ask our troops to go into harm's way all the time. We ask them to go into harm's way. And this behind me is a copy of the Soldier's Creed, a copy that usually hangs over my desk here in the Senate, and you should be familiar with it. It's the same copy that hung over my desk at Walter Reed every single day that I woke up and fought my way back because I wanted to go back and serve next to my buddies who'd saved my life. This same copy, these words are repeated over and over and over again. And let me read out two things to you, two sentences. I will always place the mission first, and I am disciplined, physically and mentally tough, trained and proficient in my warrior task. Mr. Hegseth, our troops follow these words every single day, and they man up and they pack their rucksacks and they go to war. And they deserve a leader who can lead them, not a leader who wants to lower the standards for himself or raising the standards for other people. And by the way, our troops already meet the standards. We ask troops to man that ship, fight that fire, fly that helicopter until their very last breath. And they do that every single day. They cannot be led by someone who's not competent to do the job. How can we ask these warriors to train and perform the absolute highest standards when you are asking us to lower the standards to make you the Secretary of Defense simply because you are buddies with our president-elect? And by the way, he has filed for bankruptcy 6 times. I'm not quite sure he's the kind of CEO you want to refer to as a successful businessman. Let me make it clear. You can't seem to grasp that there is no U.S. military as we know it without the incredible women that we serve. Women who've earned their place in their units. You have not earned your place as Secretary of Defense. You say you care about keeping our armed forces strong and that you like that our armed forces are meritocracy, then let's not lower the standards for you. You, sir, are a no-go at this station.
Yes or no, please. Do you believe that VSOs are wrong to support veterans in obtaining the benefits that they have rightfully earned and deserved when they signed that line like you did for your service?
Senator,
yes or
veterans
no, please?
deserve the benefits they've earned. I have been in many battles with traditional veteran service organizations over differences of opinion about how to deliver those services,
yes or
including
no?
Veterans
Do you believe
Choice,
VSOs are wrong?
Which is VSOs is a very broad term. We were a VSO also, ma'am. But some of those services took a traditionally
should they be able to help
approach.
the veterans obtain the benefits that they have earned? Yes or no? Should anyone be able to help?
Every veteran should have
Right,
rapid
thank you.
access to
Do you
all the
believe that
benefits
veterans
they've
should be
earned.
ashamed for
Absolutely.
having sought and obtained the benefits that they have earned? Do you think veterans should be ashamed to seek out benefits?
Senator, I think
Yes or
we
no?
should be ashamed as a nation of the amount of veterans that commit
You think
suicide
veterans
because they hit a brick
should be
wall.
ashamed
They
because-
commit suicide because
This is
they hit
not
a
the
brick
question,
wall
sir.
of the
I'm going to
bureaucracy
move on.
of the
I'm going to
VA.
take that
And
as a
reformers
yes.
are not courage enough.
How about veterans who suffer lasting
Take it on.
injuries or illnesses due to their military service? Do you think they deserve our support and assistance? I mean, your answers to these, they're too broad. People want to know, are you willing to support our veterans organizations that will help our veterans get every damn thing that they deserve because they signed on the dotted line to keep us safe, just like you did? I respect that. Will you?
Senator, with all due humility, I don't know that there's anyone in this room over the last 20 years that have worked harder to ensure that our veterans are taken care of. It has
So
been
do
a
you think
passion
veterans
of
are
my life,
dependent on the-
alongside with so many on this dais, to make sure that veterans receive, and it is a recruiting crisis.
But you've
When
said that
veterans
veterans are
not treated
dependent
well,
on the government.
they don't
You
want
said
their
veterans are
sons and daughters
dependent
to
on the
join.
government. Do you believe that veterans getting these benefits are dependent on the government? Or do you believe it's a benefit they've earned and deserved through their service?
It's a
Are they
benefit they've
dependent?
earned
Then-
and a hand up to the
But these
next
are your
chapter of their
words then.
life.
So you have again
Absolutely.
changed your position. Where you believe the veterans are dependent, now you believe they've they've earned and deserved it. I just think it's disrespectful to change that position. These are benefits that people may need throughout their life and may not know when they need them or how they're going to need them, and they need to be there when they do. Thank you. I'm going to move on to my next question. America's role in the world. Our alliances, the threats America's facing, they're serious, they're wide-ranging, from China to Russia to Iranian-backed terrorism. So do you agree with the National Defense Strategy that the U.S. cannot compete with China, Russia, and their partners alone, and certainly cannot win a war that way? And this is a quote from the National Defense Strategy. Is your interpretation that American first foreign policy is America alone? Does that include abandoning our allies and partners such as NATO, Taiwan, Israel, and others? And if we can't win alone and we don't strengthen our strategic partnerships, I would say that position, your position, places on a strategic path to lose to our adversaries. So maybe you're okay with choosing that path for America. I want to know how you square that position with the positions you articulated in your book, where you wrote that NATO is at relic, at best a distraction, and should be scrapped and remade. Are you okay with sending us down a path where we can't win?
Senator, the world has had, our friends in the world have had no better ally. Our allies and partners have had no better friend than President Donald Trump, who's reinvigorated a NATO alliance, who's stood behind Israel in every way, in ways this administration has not. He has ensured that the NATO alliance has become far more robust. He worked with allies in the Pacific as well.
Is Donald Trump going to stand behind Ukraine? Are you going to stand behind Ukraine? You say he's the strongest president. President-elect Trump said he will end the war in Ukraine before he takes office. Okay, so less than a week before he's inaugurated, to the best of your knowledge. Do you have knowledge of a plan that he's going to use to rapidly end the war with Ukraine? Do you believe it's feasible, that it does not make unacceptable concessions to Vladimir Putin, who is a brutal dictator? And are you going to give President-elect Trump the military advice that you have given others to achieve the objective of us winning the war in Ukraine? How do you think a rapid end to the war that Vladimir Putin started will affect the United States standing across the world?
Senator, I will always give clear guidance, my clear guidance, best guidance to the President of the United States on matters like that.
Do you think that if we concede to Vladimir Putin that will hurt our credibility with our allies and partners? And do you not believe that our adversaries are watching?
Perhaps you can take that for the record, Mr. Hegseth.
While the priority of the Biden-Austin-led Pentagon was on DEI and woke training, one of the biggest embarrassments in American history happened when we lost 13 of our heroes in the botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. Secretary Austin testified before the House Armed Services Committee a couple of years ago, and responding to a question from me said he had, quote, no regrets about what happened in Afghanistan. I wonder, what do you make of that?
Senator, it's shameful. They still tout it as the most successful airlift in American history, when what the rest of us all saw was true laid before our eyes. Utter failure, a destruction of a military legacy there, abandonment of our allies, death of American troops, detriment to our reputation, and then no answers and no accountability on the other side. And then what was unleashed because of what happened in Afghanistan? The October 7th attacks, an invasion into Ukraine. The world recognized weakness for what it was. And who bore the brunt for it? The troops on the front lines at Abbey Gate doing an impossible job, whose external security was the Taliban, because there was no actual plan for this under the Biden administration. And yet, not a single person, the only person held accountable in those moments was a Marine Corps lieutenant colonel who had the courage to stand up and say someone should be held accountable for that. His name is Stu Scheller. No one else involved has ever taken accountability for it. And when that microcosm becomes the reality of the perception of the American military or America's commitment to victory and success and positive outcomes, the world responds to that. President Trump is going to restore real deterrence by bringing a real warrior culture back, rebuilding our military, and ending wars properly. And if we have to fight them, winning them decisively.
I served in Afghanistan. You served in Afghanistan. 75% of our nation's veterans disagree with how the withdrawal from Afghanistan was handled, the embarrassment of it, what that's done, I believe, has directly impacted our historic recruitment crisis in this country, without a doubt. And you've already talked about that, but how do we fix it? How do we bring pride back to wearing the uniform for the next generation, to inspire them to do what you and I did, to raise our right hand and take that oath and serve this great country?
I really do think it comes back to strong, clear leadership, patriotic, pro-American leadership that says we're not going to focus on all the other political prerogatives. That's why we all have political perspectives. I said this before and I'll say it again. In uniform, none of that matters. You wear green, you wear blue, you bleed red. That's it. Who you vote for doesn't matter. But when the perception of that changes, then you don't want people deciding whether to serve based on a political party in power. That's a dangerous thing for continuity inside your military. And it's fragile right now. President Trump, and if I'm confirmed with my leadership, we're going to restore the continuity of an apolitical military that acts decisively and only based on merit. They sound basic, but they're fundamental.
You and I agree that wokeness is weakness. Mr. Hegseth, do you support racial quotas in recruitment or promotions in the United States military?
Senator, I do not support any form of racial quota.
Do you support affirmative action in our nation's military academies?
Senator, I only support hiring and promoting and admitting the best and brightest, whatever their background is.
I think that's very important.
I got one final question that's very important to me. This is more of a technical question, but I think it's to fix the Army in this country is a 1 or 2 year problem. We can make bullets, we can make rifles. Fix the Air Force might be a 5-year problem. To fix our Navy is a decades-long pursuit. How are you going to fix our national? You don't have all the power. We're not China. Unfortunately, you can't snap your fingers. But how are you going to our national shipbuilding industry so we are able to compete with China? Because freedom of navigation is critical to our economy and the global economy. It's going to be a very important task for you to complete.
It's a critical question, Senator, and that's why I'm grateful that President Trump has said definitively to me and publicly that shipbuilding will be one of his absolute top priorities of this administration. So a lot of it does go into pulling things up into the OSD's office, Secretary of Defense's office, to shine a spotlight on it, to make sure the bureaucracy doesn't strangle important initiatives that need to happen. We need to reinvigorate our defense industrial base in this country to include our shipbuilding capacity. Some of it is on the east, some of it's on the west, some of it's on the Great Lakes. The workforce problems that our shipyards are facing are significant, and there's been a big investment from this committee, I know, in a lot of those places because of the shortfalls, manpower issues, everything else. We also see adversaries that have been able to innovate themselves in ways that their shipbuilding capacity is, I won't reveal it at this hearing, multitudes and multitudes beyond our capabilities. So it needs to be a rapid investment, a rapid fielding, and then we need to incentivize outside entities to fill the gap. We've talked a lot about UAVs. UAVs are very important, but there's also a future of UUVs, unmanned underwater vehicles, that will be a part of amplifying the impact of our Navy, because this administration has allowed our number of ships to drop below 300. It sets a projection of 340 or 350, but doesn't create the capacity to actually address it. And so if we're going to defend our interests, our allies, and put America first, we're going to have to be able to project power. That means shipbuilding. It means historic investments in our defense industrial base there. And then also driving innovation and cost savings in ways that only business leaders inside the Pentagon can do.
When I'd add, I don't think any board in the world would have hired Steve Jobs or Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg when they founded their companies either. So this country was founded by young people who had a great vision. Thank you for being willing to serve your country again. And thanks for coming here today. I yield back, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Sheehy. You yield back the balance of your time. Mr. Ranking Member, can we agree that you and I will notify members of a specific time until which the record will remain open for submission of questions for the record?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
That will be a day or two. This concludes today's hearing. I want to thank the witnesses and their families, and this hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.